Hello, everyone, from the windy, cool town of Finland, Minnesota. Welcome, everybody. It's a great day to talk gardening. The wind is kind of shaking the house a bit. It's a little chilly and white and dirty snow outside. But as Sandy said, guess what's around the corner? March 1st. So welcome. My name is Stefan Meyer, and this is Sandy.
I'm Sandy, yeah.
And yeah, we're just here today to what kind of brought this a little conversation about is we have a brand new community garden here in Finland. It's the Give Peas a Chance community garden. We started putting that in last season, and we have a little bit more work to do yet this spring. But I don't know, Carol, you've been kind of working on that. Did you want to jump in and say anything real quick about the community garden?
Yes, we have 10 beds. We have one bed left. And they're beautiful 4 by 8 feet cedar, cedar planks filled with brand new dirt and all ready to go with really nice paths in between. We are going to have a fence that's going to go up. And in April, we're going to have a nice delivery of very, very clean compost that's going to come from WLSSD that's all been tested, about 3 cubic yards of that. And so that we're going to top off all of the beds with that. So you'll start with a beautiful, clean box filled with dirt. You're going to have the compost on the top, and it's fenced off to keep the deer away. And we're going to have some really, really beautiful objects and we're going to be doing some growing on the outside. We'll kind of use that outside space too. And so this is our first workshop, and we're looking forward to other ones and maybe potlucks and all kinds of fun things.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol. Yeah, someone just reminded me that in case I forgot to mention that about the chat, make sure when you go into the chat, if you see where it says type message here, there's a little drop down box above that. And if you hit that, you can send your message to all panelists, or it gives you the option of all panelists and attendees. Generally, you want to hit that one so everybody can see your message. Or you can also send a private message if you just select a name. So for those who might be a little bit newer to Zoom, just be aware of that, so that way we can all see your your questions. Yeah, and again, so what we're going to do today is just going to have a real kind of basic garden talk, kind of focusing on, in part, just how you work with a real small bed space, because a single garden bed is not a whole lot of room. So trying to give you ideas about, especially if you're a new gardener. And so I think, Sandy, you and I were talking maybe about like the first 30 minutes or so. We'll just kind of run through a little presentation. And then we just want to answer questions, and those can come from any direction. So some of you may have more gardening experience and might want to pick our brains about different questions that we didn't quite address. Happy to do that. I always love talking gardening. I'm assuming Sandy does too.
I do. Yes, sir.
So where do you want me to just jump in first a little bit, Sandy? And
sure. How about did you want to start talking about the soil amendments or how to have a good soil? It sounds like, well, Carol just mentioned you're getting the WLSSD garden green. And yep. I just have to say that is wonderful. That is really good stuff. Betty Carpin has been getting that for quite a few years, and her hostas are like, I don't know if you can see my arms, but her hostas are like so it really does pay off. Having a healthy soil is very important. It's the most important thing after, along with sun and rain and nutrition. Good soil is priority.
Yeah, and so so many of the gardeners who will be at the new community garden, again, we brought in Phil last year, and so we're going to be adding in that compost this year. So you probably won't have to worry too much, if at all, about nutrition and additional fertility this year, because I think that compost is going to add quite a bit for you there. But in general, if you're gardening in another location as well, as Sandy said, compost, a really well-made compost or composted manure are really good things to get into your soil. You can put those in on the spring, you can add those in the fall. Some people like to just layer it on top. Some people like to layer it on top and then turn it in a bit, either by hand. Some people really like to use machines. It's kind of, whatever works for you. And ideally, we don't want to disturb that soil too much. So try to minimize that. But again, sometimes it's worth it getting that compost turned into the soil. And in addition to fertility, and if you don't know, a good thing if you're ever out there looking at soil amendments and fertility, sometimes you'll see the 3 numbers on like a fertility package, and it'll be like a 5-4-3. And if you don't know, that stands for NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And they always list those because those are considered in the gardening and farming world the 3 most important and the biggest macronutrients. Of course, now they're coming to find out that there are other nutrients that are also equally important. But when you're looking at a fertility package, that's typically what you'll see is like those 3 numbers. And Sandy, what do you carry for fertility at the garden center, like the gardeners might use?
We do have the commercial fertilizer. It's 10-10-10, I think, in a 40-pound bag. And then we have the chicken manure. It's like a dry pelletized chicken manure. And so that's really good. A lot of people like that. That also comes in a 40-pound bag, and they're the same price. They're both about $25. We also carry the soil amendments like the manure. We have compost with manure. We have 100% cow manure. Let's see, we have some of the Happy Frog, which are organic fertilizers in a smaller bag, maybe like a 5-pound bag. And there's different versions of it. Some are more geared for tomatoes and some are just general garden crops. And let's see, we have fish emulsion and kelp. And speaking of fertility, one little thing that's really, a few people around here are using, Patty DeShaw has been using this for years, but it's called a green manure tea. And she gets alfalfa meal, and she'll put about 10 to 12 cups of the meal into a big garbage can, or you could use a 55-gallon drum. That would probably work great. And you fill that up with water, and she lets it, probably stirs it up real good, and lets it sit for about a week. And then she uses that to fertilize all her plants, probably maybe once a week or so. And she swears by it. And I know Gary Olson has been using it too, and he really likes that. So then when it starts going down, then Patty just adds more water. And so it's a wonderful organic fertilizer, alfalfa meal. Yeah.
Hey, Sandy, there's a
Yeah.
question here. How long does raw chicken manure have to set before using?
Well, Stefan probably knows the answer to that better than I do.
Yeah, I can jump in. So ideally, when it comes to like poultry or like any kind of poultry manures, they're what they're considered are hot manures because they're really high in ammonia and nitrogen. If you're going to use it fresh, it's best to actually put that in the fall and let it mellow in the soil before the spring. Otherwise, what I personally like to do is actually just compost it. Oftentimes if you're cleaning out the chicken barn, you might already have hay or straw mixed in with it. Or if you have a good source of wood chips, Lori, I think you have a big pile outside your house, or sawdust, mixing that, because there's so much nitrogen and ammonia in it, you can literally burn the roots of your plants if you don't let that mellow. So you can either put it on fresh in the fall and kind of turn it in and let it mellow over the winter, or you can compost it at least for probably a couple of months, keeping it wet in wood chips or straw, and then you can mix it in. So yeah, that's a good question.
Along with that, just for clarification, the chicken manure that we sell that's bagged in the 40-pound bags, that has been composted and it's a dry pellet. So it's safe to put on. I mean, you don't want to overdo it, but it's not considered hot manure.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorites. When I was vegetable farming, I would use that dried and slightly pelleted chicken
Mhm.
manure, or there's also a turkey version of it out of Minnesota too. But yes,
Okay.
I like that stuff. But yeah, so you may find that you might need to use that in your garden beds this year, but unlikely. I think your garden beds in the community garden are going to have a lot of fertility. Um, but otherwise, the other things, that you might throw in your bed at home, you might throw in a little bit of like rock phosphorus, or if they might want to throw in a little bit of potassium. Um, but generally speaking, if you use compost, you're going to get most of those. You might just need to boost your compost with extra nitrogen if it's not a manure-based compost, which like the stuff that we have won't be. So we might need to throw a little bit of nitrogen in there because I don't think the compost from the what are the initials again? I forget.
LSSD.
But okay. I'm going to jump real quick. Anything else you want to say about fertility at this point, Sandy? Or see
I
any
just
other
would like,
questions?
well, I just wanted to make a point quick about that I think it's really important to amend the soil every year. I mean, you might not have to do that at the community garden if it's got that good garden green from WLSSD, but I like to think of soil in a garden, kind of compare it to the forest and the woods, and kind of what's happening there is that the trees and are shedding their leaves, and all the little plants are dying down each fall. So every year that forest soil is getting replenished. And if you look at the duff can be kind of thick. And so, yeah, I really think of it as a continual thing, not just like give your garden some peat moss or manure one year and then call it good. And especially when you think that those crops are taking nutrients out of the soil, and then you're taking the crops. So you're taking those nutrients. And also just the fact that think of your soil as a living organism. And the more organic matter you can put in your soil, it just helps in multiple different ways. So yeah, that's what I liked, that analogy of the forest.
That's an excellent analogy, because yes, especially with lots of vegetables, they're kind of considered what they call medium to heavy feeders. So they pull a lot of nutrients out of that soil, more so than than a tree or wild natives would, because they tend to be more in balance. Whereas we've designed vegetables that require a lot of care and a lot of love, and that's why a lot of pests and bugs and deer love to eat them over anything else. Okay, I'm gonna share just a couple of quick little slides here. Let's see if I can do this. We're gonna go share screen. We're gonna pick that one right there, and we're gonna go share. Okay, can you see that, Sandy?
Yep.
Carol? Okay.
Yes.
So we'll just go and move into slideshow setting. Again, simple little slideshow, not a whole lot to it. But so first off, to all of you new community gardeners, and of course everyone else out there, but welcome to the Give Peas a Chance, the Finland Community Garden. And so one of the first questions is, like, when you're dealing with a small little bed space, like you're going to like either in the community garden or maybe even at your home, you actually have a pretty small space you want to try gardening in. So the first thing to ask yourself is, you ask yourself, well, what do I grow? How do I use this? And my first response is typically, well, what are your goals this year? And so, for instance, maybe you would answer that like, I'm just a beginning gardener. I don't know much about it, and I just kind of want to learn. So in that sense, you might just want to experiment with lots of little different things, try some seeding, try some transplants, try a bit of this, and just watch things grow. And that is a great goal for a beginning gardener. Or perhaps you just want fresh herbs to use all summer and then dry for the winter. Or maybe you have a favorite food, salsa, and you basically design your entire bed around salsa, some tomatoes, some cilantro, maybe some onions, and just so you can like make some of your favorite summer dish. And the other flip side is maybe you want to preserve, maybe you're like, I love making tomato sauce for the winter, so I'm going to dedicate my whole bed to certain types of tomato varieties that can well grow in our cool season here, but also are really copious producers. So that's that first question you ask yourself when you're dealing with a small little garden space. And let's see here. So let's see. I can't see. Okay, I can't see any questions. So Carol, let me know if as I go, if people are wanting to ask questions about anything. Because when I share the screen, I lose my ability to see the chat.
Okay.
And I'm going to just cover this, and I'm going to kind of let Sandy kind of jump in with the different things to grow. But other considerations for a small space, but especially within the community garden, these are some things we're going to need to think about. In part, just so we're kind to our neighbors. So for instance, we have what I call the overtakers. I think we should probably come to a general consensus. We're going to stay away from winter squash and pumpkins in the community garden space. One or two winter squash and pumpkins would literally take over probably all 10 beds real fast. If you haven't seen them, they are immensely massive plants. But then some other considerations as you think through what you want to grow. They're the ones that I kind of call the space hogs. And not that they're bad, but it's like, broccolis, cauliflowers, Brussels sprout, zucchini. These are plants that will take up quite a bit of space in a small bed and for a long period of time. And so really your question there is you just have to do that equation yourself. Like, okay, I really do want to grow broccoli. I recognize it's going to be there over half the summer, and I'm going to get like one head and maybe some side shoots, but that's okay because I really want to grow it. And I'm like, you know what? Then that totally works. So it's just that's kind of like with the space hogs, you just need to choose wisely when you're dealing with a really small bed. The other category to be a little cautious of up here in good old Finland are what I call the hot and steamy vegetables. Peppers, eggplants, melons. They love really warm weather. They love warm summer nights. And if you're not growing them inside a greenhouse, which Sandy does, maybe she can talk about that and her experience, but in a small little bed it might be harder. So be aware of that, in terms of like, is it really going to be worth it to take up that bed space the whole summer for maybe a little bit of crop at the very end of the year? And then I'll hit these last two to grow with consideration, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sandy. And the what to grow with consideration. Cabbage, for instance, there are varieties that are just like the broccolis. They're massive and they will be there all summer. But there are also varieties out there that are designed and bred for being kind of mini cabbages. They're meant to take up a small amount of space. You can grow them really closely. And if you love cabbage and they're kind of bred to be a little more short season, it would definitely could be worth it. But yeah, you got to watch some of those old timey varieties that literally are, the size of the hostas that Sandy was talking about. And there's some that I've grown that you plant them in May, and literally I'm harvesting them at the end of September. And the other two real quick would be like tomatoes. Just be aware that up here, what we'd probably be looking for if they're not undercover in a greenhouse or something, you want to look for short, cool season varieties. And then just be aware of whether or not they're determinate, which means bushy, or indeterminate, which grows like a vine. Just means you'd have to deal with them in different ways. If they're kind of the viney type, you may want to have a little simple trellis inside your bed. And cucumbers as well. Just like with the overtakers, they can really spread, but certain varieties of cucumbers actually do really well with trellising. And I'm going to show you a couple little ideas around trellising later. But so you can grow cucumbers, just recognize you want a certain variety and you're going to need to trellis them. Otherwise, they'll spill out your bed, go through the pathways. Your fellow community gardeners will be stepping all over them. Or if it's in your own garden, you might be stepping all over them. So, okay, I'm going to stop the share and kind of.
Stefan, I think you said it all.
Oh, no, my gosh, I have more slides.
So that was a really good, what you said about how to think about what to grow, because that's what I was thinking too. It's really about what's important to you. If you're interested in, if you just want like a little salad garden with lettuce and maybe fresh green bunching onions and radishes, you know, focus on that. If you want to grow that big champion tomato, think about that, focus on that. If you want to grow a big exhibition onion, think about that. So
How about Charlie Brown's pumpkin?
yes, or maybe some sweet peas that you can bring in the house and have a nice fragrant bouquet. You know, just it's whatever you're really interested in. I did think Carol had asked earlier, and Stefan, you covered this so well, but for the beginning gardener, like how to try to decide what would be easy to grow. So I did kind of break it up into two groups of what's easy and what's maybe a little bit more challenging. And it just so happens that the easy things tended to be the cool season crops, which I will call the May crops. And then the little bit more difficult things would be the June crops. So I'll just read them off and then I'll kind of go back and talk about them. So for the May crops, the easy crops, I would say they are like radishes, lettuce, beets, Swiss chard, onions, peas, potatoes, kale, broccoli, carrots. Okay, so radishes you can put out really about as soon as the ground can be worked. And they're like probably the shortest crop. I think they're about 30 days, give or take, depending on the weather. Lettuce is such a great crop, and there's so many wonderful varieties, and now there's a lot of seed mixes in one seed packet. So that's a real fun thing that you can get out right away. And you know how in the spring, we're also just craving that fresh, crunchy vegetable and produce. Beets are an early season crop, and beets would be a good one for if you have children or grandchildren, because it's a large seed, so it's easy to poke in the soil. The beet tops you can harvest. You don't want to harvest the whole top, but kind of selectively, maybe a couple leaves off each plant while the beet is still fairly young. And you can treat that just as a cooked green, like, what was that?
a big thing of snow just fell off the roof right in front of me. And I was like, whoa.
Maybe you had a bat in your house.
It scared me.
Yeah, so the beet greens, similar to like Swiss chard or spinach, you can cook those greens. And Swiss chard is related to beet, and that also has the large seed, which would be easy for a little kid to plant. I grew up on Swiss chard, so it's one of my favorite vegetables. I love that dark green leaf, and it's really packed full of vitamins and minerals, and that pretty red stem or multicolored stem. That one freezes really well. And it's a crop that you can harvest all summer long. Same as with kale, if you cut off the outer leaf and then just keep harvesting it, you probably want to side dress it, which is adding a little compost or some kind of fertilizer, maybe once or twice during the growing season, since it is a continual grower and you can continue to harvest it. Peas are another one that are great for kids because the seed is just the dried pea, so it's large. You can see where you're putting it. Years ago, I listened to James Crockett on Crockett's Victory Garden, so most of you don't know who he is, but so he recommends, like with the shelling peas, the peas that we, just the regular pea, and which tends to be a bush pea, but he plants them fairly thickly because then those crowded plants tend to support each other. I know Stefan's going to talk about supports, but he would also take like little sticks that weren't too long and just put them in the bed, and then that helps support them. The thing about peas, those kind of bush peas, is that they do ripen kind of in a more narrow window of time. So once you start, they start ripening, just eat them, gorge on them. I really believe in eating a lot of whatever happens to be ripe at the time. One thing about peas is that they, you can only, well, I mean, it's best if you eat them within a couple of days, because similar to sweet corn, the sugar starts turning to starch. So if you can't eat them right away, then they're a perfect candidate for freezing, blanching and freezing and eating later. That way you're preserving, the sugar and the sweetness. The other two types of peas would be the snow peas, which are the flat pea pods that people use in stir fries. and then the sugar snap peas. And I think those only come in more of a climbing variety that you would want trellised, which Stefan is going to talk about that. Another easy crop is potatoes in your friable, well-tilled soil, aerated soil. You just dig a hole about a foot or 8 inches at least. And then you use a seed potato and you can cut that in half. You should have probably at least 2 eyes, which are the little sprouts. And so you plant those facing upwards, fill in the dirt. And then when the plant is about, maybe the leaves are about 8 inches or so, and you can correct me, I'm just kind of giving a ballpark.
Nope, that's
but
perfect.
You start raking or hoeing in the soil around the base of the plant. That helps the potatoes underneath stay moist, and also protects them from the sun, which can cause the potato to turn green. And that is, it tastes bitter and it's actually slightly toxic. Although I can say I've eaten my share of green potatoes and I'm still here to tell the tale. But so I think potatoes are fun for kids and they're fairly easy. And I love potatoes. They're like our mainstay. So one other crop is onions. Onions, yeah, they're the first thing you should probably plant out, and you can plant them early, and you should plant them early because they are a day length sensitive crop. And I know some people say you should get them in before Memorial Weekend. Well, actually, you should probably get them in before that, as soon as the soil can be worked. I would say by at least mid-May. If you don't get them in a timely fashion, you're not going to get a very big onion. But if you get them in early and then water them, you're going to get a good sized onion. So onions come in 2 different ways. Either the little set, which is actually a little onion bulb, and that's another one that would be fun for kids to plant because you just push it in about halfway. The other way that onions can be planted is from seed, and at the greenhouse we start seeds. I'll probably be starting them in within a week, and we sell them in a tray about yay big, and it has maybe like 80 to 100 they're just little tiny seedlings. So they are more challenging to start because you have to get down on your hands and knees and put each one of those little spears. That's where it's nice to find a young person like Julia to help you plant your little onion seedlings. Some people really swear by the seedling plants as opposed to the onion sets. They think they get a better product. We mostly plant our own from the little seedlings. Yeah, so carrots are easy too, but they do require thinning. If you don't get out there and thin them after they're up about yay big, you're just going to have little pencil carrots. And who wants that? We want a big crunch carrot. So certain crops have duties that you really need to pay attention to. You need to be an attentive gardener, not an inattentive gardener. So yeah, those are the early kind of what I consider the easier crops, the May crops. So things that are a little more difficult are the warm season crops: tomatoes, peppers, basil, cuke, squash, celery, green beans. They really need the soil to be warm and the air temperature to be warm. There's no point in planting bean seeds too early because they're just going to rot in the ground. Yep. And we've all seen those tomatoes that are out there and they're kind of white and just very tortured. That's because you planted them too early. So try to wait as long, I would say like towards the end of June. I know it's variable because every year is variable. Sometimes it's warmer. We get a nice warm May towards the end of May, and other times it's cold and rainy into June. So you do have to be pay attention to the weather and what's going on there. But really, beans, tomatoes, peppers, they just don't like it if it's in the 50s. So if you can hold off, you'll be much happier in the long run. So back to you, Stefan.
And to answer a couple quick questions I saw in the chat over there. I know one person was asking about growing garlic. And so, yeah, garlic is typically planted in the fall. I usually plant it sometime in early to mid-October up here. Although I have planted garlic bulbs in the spring here and gotten a nice crop. They generally aren't going to be quite as big and robust if they're planted in the spring. But again, I've done it and had great success up here. And then what was the other question? I saw one more that was hiding in there. Oh, Joan was wondering about beans. And yeah, beans definitely work up here. Again, as Sandy said, if you're going to plant them by seed, which is what you typically would do and not really use starts too much, you just want to make sure the soil is warm. Now in a raised bed, that soil is going to warm up quicker than soil that's in the ground. So that might give you a little bit of extra space there. But yeah, you've got your choice when it comes to beans of like a bush bean, which of course is going to be shorter and not require trellising. But you could also do a pole bean if you put up a trellis, because then you're kind of using the vertical height in your bed, and you can have other kind of bushy plants on the ground. You can also, and typically you'd probably want to go for just go for like fresh eating beans as opposed to going for what would they call that? When the bean dries off? There's yeah,
Dry
basically
beans.
dry beans. That's the word I was looking for. Jeez, you don't want to go for dry beans probably in a real small space if you're limited in space, just because they have to sit there for so much longer. But again, as Sandy said, if that's what you're interested in, then that's what you grow. And beans are good in the sense that then they can store and you can use them real easily. You use them whenever you want to use them in the winter. But just know that letting them dry down to that point, it definitely takes quite a bit more time. So you'll be using up that space for quite a bit longer. So again, it just comes down to what you're interested in. And there was one other thing. Can we grow rye and use green shoots for chickens? You certainly can grow rye. Winter rye, I grow winter rye as a cover crop here, and I usually don't let it go to seed because I want to do that for other things. But and cover crops will probably be something we'll talk, but that'll probably be at the end of the season. Ways to cover crop your beds. But yeah, you can certainly grow rye shoots and use those green shoots for chickens. Or you can even just germinate them and feed them to chickens. So we're going to jump back into, let's see what else was in my lovely little slideshow here. So there's that. I think Sandy basically talked about the next slide, which was, let's see here. And I went shooting past it. Okay, well, why are you doing that? So that's what Sandy just talked about. Okay, so I'm going to chat about just a couple of little simple structures, because especially since it kind of jumped on what Sandy was just saying there. So 2 little simple structures that you can use on a small garden bed. One is called a cloche, is typically how it's pronounced, or you can just call it a small tunnel. But it's basically just you can use some PVC. I use some electrical conduit I had lying around. Anything really that you can even use a nice flexible type of wood, a stick that you would like to harvest. But basically anything that you can just kind of bend over and then pull plastic over the top. And, this is one way that if you wanted to try to get some of those heat loving crops in a little bit earlier than usual, you can use this as a technique, because what it's doing is during the day with the sun, even if you have both ends open, like if you're looking at this central picture here, you're creating a little heat trap in there. And one of the things that those plants love is they really love those warm temperatures during the day. Because oftentimes, like peppers and tomatoes, if you talk to like plant scientists, how they reference how quickly they mature, or how they measure how long they're mature to maturity, is based upon heat units. And heat units are basically comes down to like, okay, how warm does it get during the day, and then how cool does it get at night, and then that affects how quickly the plant matures. So with a little structure like this, you can kind of create a microclimate that can help like tomatoes, or can help peppers, maybe even basil, which is a little more sensitive to like cooler temperatures. It can help you get a little bit of an extra start. Now beware that, if it drops down into the 30s, this is going to do nothing for those little babies at night. Or, it'll still help them during the day on a sunny day. I mean, it can be 32 outside under that plastic. You could be cooking at about 60 or 70. But at night, that's, you're still going to be dropping in the 30s inside the bed. It will give you a few degrees of protection. But again, you can also use a structure like this in the fall. If you've got some of those It's those nice greens, and you want to protect them from a little bit of that fall frost and try to push into the fall. That's another thing that it's really good for. Another structure that you can really, the type of structure, are the trellising, as I'd mentioned. So there's, people get creative. If you just Google like pea trellis or garden bed trellis, there's so many ideas out there. And so I just picked a couple like unique things that you can literally use with a little bit of twine and some sticks. I've used like here, I've used this little A-frame one a lot. I have used this triangle one. I don't like it as much. I find it a little like, especially in a garden bed, it doesn't quite fit as well, but you can certainly do it. Over here in the southeast corner, you see the simple little pea trellis there. Again, as Sandy said, there's certain types of peas that you can actually just plant real densely and they actually hold themselves up. Or if you want to go for something that's maybe like 2 or 3 feet tall, you'll probably want to have some basic structure that they can put their little tendrils on and as they climb up it. And the beauty of, again, a trellis system is you can start using that vertical. You don't have to just think of your square feet straight on the ground. You can think in 3 dimensions and like, okay, how can I start using things up here? Another thing, like I think Joan had mentioned, like the 3 sisters idea of, you grow corn and then you can plant pole beans at their base, and then the pole bean uses the corn as the trellis. And then the 3rd sister, of course, is typically some sort of a squash that kind of runs on the ground. So 3 sisters might not be the best idea for the community garden, because again, you got to watch, like in a small space, you got to watch anything that vines and likes to go creeping into other people's beds. And this is one example of a cucumber trellis up here in the corner. Just kind of, again, a little bit of an A-frame. You'd probably want to try to find, make sure you read about the varieties. There are certain varieties of cucumbers that they don't tend to get quite as robust, and they'll usually mention if they're good for trellising. And you could do that in a small space if that's what you really wanted to focus on. One of the things that I like with this then is if you grow those in the summer, then they tend to create a nice cool shaded area in the middle of them, and you could actually be growing lettuce like in the middle of July, when typically, like if it was in full sun, it might be a little bit but if you give it enough shade, especially in Finland where we don't tend to get real hot summers, with a little bit of shade, you can have another round of lettuce right in the middle of the summer. But let's see, I think that was that one for now. No, did you want to talk seasonality? You kind of already did. Anything else you want to say about that?
Well, one thing that I'd like to say that's maybe slightly related to the different structures that you had and kind of extending the season is hardening off little vegetable garden transplants. And it's kind of a misnomer to call it hardening off, because you can't really totally harden off a plant that is sensitive to frost. I mean, it doesn't matter how much you harden it off. If it's sensitive to frost and you get a frost, it's going to damage it or kill it. But I like to think of it more as a kind of a toughening up of the plant. When you purchase the little transplant, or if you start your own seed and have these little transplants, they're grown in a really protected environment. There's no wind or harsh rain or anything like that. So they have this lush foliage. And if you're going to plant those things right out, it can be such a shock. So it is good to do what's referred to as the hardening off process, which takes place over the course of, say, a week or even 2, depending on our weather. But the whole idea or the goal is to toughen them up, or kind of acclimate them to the outside environment. And so I know they recommend, like, if you have, say, some tomato transplants and you want to toughen them up, so you put them out one day for like maybe a couple hours, and then you bring them back in at night. And so you're bringing them, back and forth and extending their outside time each day. There is kind of a danger in that, though, as you have to be attentive. You can't just put them out one day and then, kind of forget about them. And I think that we are kind of oblivious to the wind, but as humans, because we can run back into our house and we're, busy doing our thing and we don't realize that the wind is really, moving out there. Well, if you put a tender plant out there, I mean, within an hour or two, it can just, shred them. So you want to be really cognizant of what's happening outside. I guess I would suggest maybe rather than putting a little pack of tomatoes right outside, maybe you could put them in a cardboard box or, a plastic tub or something like that initially. So that is all they're getting is just a little bit of wind on the top of the plant. And so you're kind of more gradually building up their toughness. When you do put them out to harden off like that, since they are going to be exposed to more weather and more sun and more wind, they're probably going to need more water. So it's just kind of a process that you have to be sort of aware of what's going on in the weather. If we get a big, downpour, then just be aware that your tender little seedling might get kind of beaten up. And so I guess along with that too, when you do set them out, when you actually plant them, you figure, okay, it's warm enough and they've been hardened off enough. I like to put out, like take a cottage cheese container or a yogurt container and cut the bottom out of it. I know it's plastic and it's ugly, but so then when you plant them, you just put that right around the cabbage plant or the tomato plant, and it helps with cutworms. It's preventative against cutworms. It's easy to water right down in that cylinder. And it helps with that wind or other little critters that might be moving through the garden. So yeah, just a couple little tips.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that the wind is probably can be one of the most ferocious things. If something's been living in a greenhouse where its entire life it's been protected from the wind, you put them out there and the wind can destroy them real fast.
Yeah.
And so everything she says is I absolutely 100% agree with. And also then let me give my perspective as a vegetable farmer who had done a lot of vegetable cropping, where you don't always get to take care of things as nicely as you do in a garden. And one of the things that's shown me is, what, in the end, plants are also very resilient. If you don't harden them off or they get affected by the wind, they'll often come back, but what you'll do is you'll slow their development. They may not ripen as quickly. It could lead to more like health issues later in their life. But again, it's, if a plant gets beaten up, don't think it's the end of the world. We've all done it. We've all not taken care of those little babies like we should have. But they're resilient as well. So don't despair if something does.
To a certain point, they're resilient. I just have to give an example. People will buy like a fuchsia basket and they're so lush, they've got all that lush, tender foliage. Well, then they hang them out and then we get a real big, big wind. We get those northeast or northwest winds and an east wind. But, and then, I mean, a few times people have brought back their fuchsias and they're just like totally dead. I don't know what happened. Okay, it was pretty windy yesterday, real windy yesterday. So, that's what I mean about we're not always real sensitive to what the plant is feeling, from the environment. So, I mean, even a fuchsia, if all the leaves are, dead, most things have auxiliary buds. And so then, I mean, it will come back, but it'll take a couple months in that case for it to get back to the stage that it was at. So.
That's true. Very true.
Sorry to be such a downer. I've seen so many.
No, it's a give and take with gardening. It's so anybody have any questions out there? I think we were going to talk about what else did you have on your list out there? Oh, I see one in the Q&A. So feel free to throw any questions. Someone had a question. Recommended soil temperatures for direct sowing seed or seedlings for warm and cool crops. Because that's really going to depend on the type of crop you're talking. Because again, there are like the cool season crops that Sandy mentioned, like radishes or spinach or lettuce. They actually prefer to germinate in, like 40-degree soil. Whereas if it's a warm weather crop, then it's going to prefer warmer soils. So like, for instance, Sandy, like if you're planting out your beans in the area or some of your summer crops, would you do them by seed versus transplant? like a beans, for instance, or
Yeah, from seed. Well, at least that second week in, I mean, the end of the first week in June, that's when our last frost-free date is.
okay.
But it's really every season, every year can be slightly different, you know. We can
Yes.
get maybe it's warmer one year, maybe it's cooler the next. Sometimes in June, we get those cool 2 weeks of rain and fog and cold. So I'm not sure, is it like 50 degrees that beans like the soil temperature?
Yeah, with beans, I wouldn't go below 50 degrees. I would
Yeah.
not like or especially if it's wet. And that's the other thing too. It's like, is it cool and rainy or cool and dry? If it's cool and dry, it may not be as big of a deal, but if it's cool and wet, those seeds will just sit there and they'll rot. They'll rot in the ground. So there is that you have to kind of consider more than just the soil temperature. It's like the moisture level. But yeah, I'd say beans over 50 degrees. See, I'm trying to think other like beets. Well, chard I always do as a transplant. So I guess I've always started those indoors. I don't really plant them because they take so long otherwise outside. But I'm trying to think, beets I'll plant outside. Beets can handle some fairly cool temps. They'll germinate pretty readily in like 40-degree soil.
Yeah.
I think anything in the brassica, like kales will germinate pretty cool. I'm trying to think what are the other warm weather ones that I try to germinate, because most of those I guess I just germinate into as transplants.
So we have a number of
Corn is another one. Yeah, you don't want to plant corn in cool, wet soil either. You might as well just wait till the soil warms up if you want to do corn of any type. And I'd probably put that above 50 degrees, if not above 55 for corn, because they don't like germinating in wet, cold either.
We have a number of questions. Can we grow eatable flowers? What about herbs? Squirrels in the backyard and pH on healthy soil.
Edible flowers?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, I only know of a couple. Let's see, nasturtium leaves, squash blossoms. Let's see, I guess little violas and pansies. I'm not sure what else is edible. Do you know, Stefan?
Yeah, I haven't really grown flowers for the edible purpose, but yes, there are definitely flowers out there that are known for their edibility, and you just do a little research on them, find out what you want to experiment with. But yeah, it's not something I've ever really focused on too much, but I do love eating nasturtium leaves and flowers. Kind of have to watch out for the aphids because they really love hanging out in those, but whatever. It just adds a little bit of sweet protein all at once.
How about herbs? I know that there's one person in the community garden that really is excited about herbs.
Yeah, and I guess I'd say two things to that. If they're an annual herb, like cilantro or basil or I'd say definitely you can grow that in the bed. What I kind of envision is part of what we'd create a bed around the outside fence, and because there we can put in a lot of the perennial herbs, because deer really won't touch those. They'll kind of nibble a bit, but they're not going to destroy them. So like we could do like some thyme, maybe we can have some rosemary in a pot, but then we'd have to bring that indoors and protect it in the winter somewhere. So I think we can think of doing an herb garden around the fence that deer won't touch. But then, yeah, there are other herbs you can grow in your bed too. Anything you want to add to the herbs there, Sandy?
Oh, a couple kinds of parsley. We really like the
parsley,
large
yes.
leaf. Yeah, the Italian parsley we kind of like, and I always bring that in at the end of in the fall. We still have 2 pots in our house right now, and then I just clip off the leaves and put them in potato soup or salads or really chili, anything. So those are 2 good ones. And basil, sage, oregano. Yeah, cilantro.
Do you typically get your sage overwintering outdoors, or do you have to kind of bring that in a bit?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
No.
I've gotten it last winter. I got it to one of mine to overwinter outside, but then again, we had 5 feet of snow sitting on top of it.
Yeah.
So sometimes overwintering really depends upon snow depth.
Yeah. My neighbor Maria, she always had the curly parsley, and it would come back just thick in her garden. And so I'm not really sure if it was just always self-sowing, because other like Italian parsley, that would maybe overwinter and come back, but it would go to flower right away.
Yep, it's a
But with
biennial.
Maria always had the curly, so I think it was just constantly sowing itself, the curly parsley.
Or if we're going to have a fence around it, but many squirrels in my backyard, how do I protect seeds and plants from them, from the squirrels?
Oh,
A slingshot.
yeah. And yeah, the fence around the garden is not going to protect the garden from squirrels. They will laugh at the fence. So that is actually a really good question. Yeah, I guess like, because when I do larger farming, squirrels would always get some of it, but we would just plant a lot of extra, even more than squirrels could eat. But in a small garden space, squirrels can be quite damaging. So the slingshot.
They love strawberries.
Yeah, they love strawberries. I've had them go in and like steal tomatoes and then take one bite out of the tomato and leave it on the ground, then go steal another one. So, there's the natural predators. There's, I know some community gardens will they'll live trap them so that they don't have to kill them. And then they take them somewhere and relocate them. The problem there is if you have a lot of squirrels, that basically they're very territorial. You get rid of one and the next door one goes, oh, there's open territory, and it just moves in. Otherwise, like, the other thing I've seen people do is you can actually put like a kind of like when you're seeding, if you've seeded everything out, some people will put like a fine mesh screen on top of the ground until like they see their things start to come up, because once they've germinated, it's less likely for the squirrels to go after them. But and again, squirrels are one of those creatures that are one of the hardest ones to deal with.
What
I hate
what
to say this.
should healthy soil have? What are you shooting for?
Oh, what pH? Okay, well, Sandy, do you want to say anything else about squirrels?
Well, I kind of hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. Rat traps work, and the Finland Co-op has nice rat traps.
So it all depends upon your philosophy when it comes to protecting your crops.
Yeah, and if I was just, gardening, like I wouldn't put a rat trap out there. But if I sow cucumbers or squash seeds in the greenhouse, I mean, they'll come and find their way in there and eat every single seed. So sometimes you have to take kind of unpleasant measures. So, I mean, I have killed a few, yeah. But I know my neighbor Maria, she used to shoot them, and she'd shoot like 30 in 1 year. It was crazy.
Yeah, because you shoot one and then the neighbor comes in.
Oh, yeah. So anyway.
We have a few more. We've got about 3 or 4 more questions. What pH should healthy soil have?
For vegetables, it generally needs to fall in you really don't want to go below 5.5, and they usually say in the 6 to 7 range is kind of like the ideal. And yeah, if you're growing in the native soil around here, it's going to be, that's one of the things you have to be considerate of. And I guess we didn't really talk about a soil test, but if you're growing in the native soil, and you may want to do a soil test. I think in the garden beds at the community garden, we probably won't do that to begin with, because again, it's new soil and compost, and the pH is going to be just fine there. But I'd say, you really don't want to go below 5.5, and ideally it's between 6 and 7 for most vegetables.
And let's see, we have about 3 more. Chamomile flowers.
Chamomile is awesome. It makes an amazing tea.
And then bee balm.
Also makes an amazing tea. You could certainly grow both of those. I've never eaten bee balm. Have you tried eating it, Sandy?
No.
Yeah, I've made the tea before.
I love the fragrance, though. It's wonderful when you brush up against a Monarda. Oh, lovely.
Yeah, it is. And that can attract some hummingbirds and yeah. So definitely, I'd say both of those are great candidates to grow, and you maybe not necessarily eat them directly, but you can make tea out of them, and yeah. I
mentioned calendulum.
Calendula, yep, that's another edible one.
I'd like to say
Um,
something real quick now, just before we end. And that is that seeds were in short supply last year, and that's happening again this year. Some of the, like I
yes.
heard that at Menards, I think it was in the Twin Cities, but that their seed stands are totally sold out already. So I know Zups is gonna be, they have their seed stand, but they don't have it up yet. It's in Northrop King. So that's one place you could get packets of seeds. There's a few places that still have them. I think some of the order, Seed Park Seed Company, Fedco, you're kind of put on a wait list, but you can order from them. And like Johnny's Selected Seed, they're only selling to commercial growers now and farmers. So if you
They-
need seed and there's something particular that you want, get it as soon as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I did notice that Johnny's now has, they said they're gonna reopen it up on March 3rd.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Yes.
And let's see, I'm gonna real quick jump into my, oops, I need to share, don't I? You can't see that, can you? First I have to hit the share button. Now I'll just show you my quick little resource slide that ends my slideshow here. Let's see here, soil. So here, some of the resources, you know, it like one good like gardening design philosophy that you may want to look into for a small bed space is just known as square foot gardening. It was quite the thing for a while, and you can still find a lot of books out there. At the library at Silver Bay has lots of different books on square foot gardening, and it's just a way that helps you kind of think through how to use a small space and to get the most that you want out of your garden bed. If you happen to want to learn more about soil science or botany, they have these two books, both Soil Science for Gardeners and Botany for Gardeners. They just take a real kind of simple approach, because typically gardeners don't need to dive down into the depths of botany and soil science, but it's good to have some basic information, and it kind of helps you make decisions. So if you happen to be someone who wants to dive into those are good books. As some seed sources, Sandy had mentioned Fedco seeds, Johnny seeds. Another one I like to use is High Mowing Organics. They're out of Vermont. Again, a lot of these are putting you on wait lists, or they've frozen their seed selling. It's crazy because it's nurseries too. There are lots of nurseries I've been looking at, and they've like sold out of all of their plants like months before. Yeah, it's very strange times. But another one that I really love is I like to get tomato seed from tomatofest.com. It's all organic heirloom tomato seeds, and they have hundreds of varieties. But what I really like about them is they have it broken down by category. Then like one of their categories you can go into are cool season tomato varieties. And they have a good 30 or 40 different cool season tomato varieties. A lot of them are varieties that have come out of like northern Russia over the years, because they've bred them for kind of cool short summers. Otherwise, they'll also break them down so you can get extra early or early tomatoes, which is typically means they'll ripen like 65 days or less. And honestly, up here in Finland, those are the ones you really want to aim for. If you go for mid-season or late season tomatoes up here without some kind of special like kind of season extension or greenhouse, you're going to have a real hard time getting any kind of a crop off of those mid or late season tomatoes. And they're usually like 70 to 90 days to harvest, and they'll produce some gorgeous tomatoes, but you'll be lucky to maybe get one in early September before the plant dies. Otherwise, definitely feel free to email me. You can see my email there. Again, this will be on a recording on several places on the Finland Food Chain website. So you can look it up and find my email, or you can scribble it down. I'm always happy to answer gardening questions. The community garden is right around the corner from the North Shore Agroecology Center, where I'll be working part-time this summer, along with other gardeners. If you've got a problem, a question, trust me, gardeners love talking about gardening. You're not bothering us with any question. We will probably give you more information than you really, really wanted. Sandy has an amazing book right there.
Yeah, I just
Oh,
wanted to
here, let me
give-
stop sharing my screen here real quick
Okay.
so people can see that.
I
There you
just
go.
wanted to give this one last resource, organic Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening by Rodale Press. It was published in 1959, but it's just a wonderful resource.
Mhm.
It has, I mean, it covers vegetables, mulching, manure, herbaceous plants, perennials, trees, fruit trees, everything. And, you know, gardening hasn't changed all that much, but it talks about, you know, the pH and different, what crops like lime, what crops don't. So it's just a wonderful all around source of good information.
Oldie
there.
but a goodie.
Yeah.
Oldie but a goodie.
Yep.
Thank
Let's
you very
see.
much.
Yeah, and there's some more questions. So I just want to say to everybody, if you want to leave, you can. I'm happy to stay on and kind of address a few more questions for a few more minutes. Just make sure everybody has their questions answered. But otherwise, if you need to check out, thank you for coming and attending. We really appreciate it. Let's see. So I see a question there. I have seeds from last year. Would they still be viable? Well, the question is, and all my friends would always hate it when I would answer their questions this way. That depends. In part, it depends what the seed is, like what type of plant it is, because different plants, different crops can last less or more time. Depends how you stored it. Did you let them sit somewhere in high humidity and get moist and possibly kind of start to germinate? Did you freeze them? Usually they can go through a freezing if they're dry enough, but if they had too much humidity and moisture in the seed when you froze it, that could actually burst the cells. So so basic rule of thumb is there are certain crops that don't last real long. Corn doesn't typically last very long, 1 to 2 years before your germination really goes down. Spinach, a couple of years before your germination can really go down. Onions, I have found, I mean, typically onions are like 1 year. Man, by your second year of trying to seed out onions, you get very, very poor germination, at least in my experience. Other thoughts from your end, Sandy?
I found that tomatoes seem to last quite, you know, several years.
Mhm.
Celery, I swear I had some that was about 7 or 8 years old and it still germinated. They're really big packages, and so they lasted forever. And wow, I can't believe it. And then broccoli and cabbage, some of those I'd say 4 years or so. But the cost of seed is going up, so I would, I don't know, try to give them the benefit of the doubt, but
Mhm.
try not to order more than what you think you might need within a year or two. Peppers, they seem to maybe about 3 years or so, and then they start going downhill. So, but yeah, keeping them in a cool, dry place is important. Mhm.
Yeah, so I see, Lori, you said they've been kept in a jar in the refrigerator, and that's a great place. Then if as long as it's not like a seed that literally only lives 1 year, like onion seed, I think that they'll probably germinate just fine. Let's see, other questions. Okay, so Sandy, you'll have to, what is the name of the company that we're gonna get that soil compost from again? Because it's down in Duluth. I always
Oh.
forget the,
Well, it's Western Lake Superior Sanitary District, or WLSSD. And the
WLL.
name of it is called Garden Green, the compost.
Garden Green.
Mhm.
Okay.
It's a great
Yeah.
product. If you can, you know, if you want more for your regular garden, I think it probably costs about $8 a bag now. And,
Mhm.
you know, it's more expensive than other types of compost, but it is a really good product. And some years we carry it, but we've had a hard time getting it because, yeah, it's hard to get somebody to deliver it up here.
Yeah,
And of
so
course,
I think
pallet.
Carol, I think Carol has found someone to deliver it up here. So
Oh, good.
so what we may actually do is we might actually try to order extra, and then we can be here then people can come and grab
Sure.
extra for their own gardens.
Yeah, we
I
can have a
think,
pile. We can have a pile out there at the church.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. So we'll use it. We'll use it, and I think we even have some soil left out there too
Yes,
after
we do.
last fall.
Yeah, we
So
do.
we'll have to advertise that.
Yeah, are you getting
Um,
it in bulk or are you getting it bagged?
Yeah, yeah, we're getting, right now we're planning on 3 cubic yards.
but
Mm.
but
which
we
is
can
like a
certainly
dump
up
truck.
that. Yeah, because they
But
can
we can
typically
get
carry.
more. We can
Yeah.
get more then. Uh-huh.
Let's see. So Joan was asking, can you grow sunflowers? You certainly, if you want, you can certainly grow sunflowers in your garden bed. The only thing I would say with that is just keep an eye on how tall they are, because there are some sunflowers that get really tall, and then you might actually start shading someone's bed behind you. So just bear that in mind. But I'd say if you, and there are a lot of sunflowers that get like 4 or 5 feet tall, and I think that'd be just fine. So just, I think with the sunflowers, and there are some sunflowers that literally will get like 10 feet tall and they'll have heads this big. And yeah, you have a couple of those in your bed, and the person with the bed next to you might not be as happy.
Maybe some little marigolds would be nice in your
Oh,
garden. I would
yes.
definitely plant a flower or two. I'm a real advocate of flowers because the vegetable plants nourish our bodies and our souls to a certain extent, but the flowers definitely nourish our souls. So plant a few flowers too.
Yes. Yep. Well, we'll see what we can do to get some nice flowers around as we continue to develop the garden space.
The calendulas, that would be a good one. Mhm.
And don't marigolds deter gophers? I
That's
don't
an
know
old
if
wives'
anything
tale.
truly deters gophers.
don't think
I know there are lots of like kind of homegrown recipes for deterring pests, and what I found is in some cases they help, in other cases they don't help. So some people will swear by a method, and other people will be like, that didn't work at all. So I think it kind of depends upon the critter you're dealing with. Let's see. We're in San Antonio now. As in San Antonio, Texas. I'd like to say I'm jealous, but you guys also had some cold weather down there recently too. But most of our plants, landscape, and otherwise were devastated, yes, by the recent Arctic freeze. What products have you used that have been successful in protecting plants from the cold? So you can, like I said, you can use that plastic. You can create a little cloche over your plants, and that will give them some protection from frost. Lots of farmers use, it's like what is that fabric called? It's a Rime.
Remake?
Yep.
Remake.
Lots of farmers will use Rime, which is like a woven fabric. And that's used for frost protection over row crops. You can get that from a lot of gardening stores, like Johnny's carries Rime, or I'm sure Fedco probably does, even though I've never looked at it there. And or you can go through bigger greenhouse stores. If you want to, and again, it kind of depends when you talk protecting plants from a freeze. It depends what you're talking. It's like if you're talking a light frost or if you're talking a hard freeze. A hard freeze, you start getting down the mid-20s. There's not a whole lot you can do for most plants. It's going to kill them. So you can kind of extend that season, but then again, Mother Nature always bats last.
Well spoken.
Every time I think I've figured it out, Mother Nature's like, watch this. And maybe a final question here. Is there any companion planting? Have you ever worked with companion planting, Sandy, or have any resources you've used?
Not that much, but I know there's books out there, and I'm sure if you looked on the internet, I mean, one way to think about it is if you have a crop that's maybe quick, like radishes or lettuce, might be planted with something like cauliflower, so that when one crop is done, then the other kind of takes over and uses that space. But I've heard of peas and carrots. I've heard that things that taste good together might be, I don't know. Just investigate it, read the books and the literature online.
So one book that comes to mind that's kind of a classic is Carrots Love Tomatoes.
Oh yeah.
And I guess my personal thing is I've experimented with stuff and read some stuff around companion planting, and if you really want to go down the science of it, the science around a lot of that is iffy. But at the same time, again, there are people that would do it and swear by it, and then there are people that do it and be like, that was a waste of time. I think I think in part, it depends upon your intention, your climate, maybe like how much attention you're giving something. I think there are so many factors that science can't actually put a yes or no to companion planting and its benefits. But, now when it comes to like beneficial insects, I think it's a lot more in that case where you can attract certain types of insects or deter, like onions are known to deter certain types of insects. So you planting onions will kind of repel them. But again, I think you'd have to do the research. It's not something I've looked into for quite a while. Okay, I think on that note, Sandy.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
everybody, please stay tuned for more community garden, educational events and get-togethers as soon as we can. We'll be doing some get-togethers. Thank
Yes.
you. Thanks. to
Happy
both of you.
gardening.
Yeah.
Happy gardening.
Okay.
Don't start tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sandy.
Sure.
Hopefully you have a great afternoon. Hopefully you get to play in the greenhouse.
Yeah, I just might do that. Go look at my seeds and start getting ready. There was so many other seed companies that probably